All right, buckle up, because today we're diving deep into a case that landed smack dab in the Philippine Supreme Court.
Oh, yeah, this one's a doozy.
We're talking Dela Cruz versus People.
A real nail-biter.
It's a story about a seafaring trainee, a bag, and, well, let's just say more than a few revolvers. And it raises some really interesting questions about searches, seizures, and, all that good stuff. We've got the court documents right here.
Hot off the presses.
And we're going to break it all down for you step by step.
Layer by layer.
So, was Mr. Dela Cruz intentionally trying to sneak those firearms onto a ferry? Or was there something else going on?
Yeah, was he set up?
And did the search violate his rights? We're going to look at all sides of this story.
All the angles.
And try to untangle this legal web.
It's a good one. It really highlights that push and pull between individual liberty and, keeping the public safe.
Right.
And it all goes down at the Cebu domestic port.
Oh, I've been there.
It's May 11th, 2007. Picture it. Ferries coming and going, people rushing to catch their boats, and Mr. Dela Cruz is about to board a ferry to Iloilo. A trip he makes pretty often, actually.
So he's a seasoned traveler, knows the drill.
Exactly. Checks his bag just like he always does, and bam, things take a turn.
What happened?
An X-ray scan shows count 'em, 3 revolvers just sitting in his bag.
Whoa.
Port security, they see that, they question him, and he's like, yep, that's my bag. But here's the kicker. The court documents say that Dela Cruz consents to a search.
Interesting. So he gives them permission to look through his bag.
That consent, that becomes a huge piece of this whole legal battle. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's back up a bit. What exactly are the charges against Dela Cruz?
Well, he's hit with 2 charges. Illegal possession of firearms under Republic Act No. 8294.
Gotcha.
And violation of the election gun ban, which was in full swing at the time. That falls under a few different laws. Commission on Elections Resolution number 87764, Section 261 of Batas Pambansa Pelde 8818. Hold on, election gun ban. What's that all about?
Right, so during elections in the Philippines, they have this strict gun ban. It means no one, and I mean no one, can carry firearms in public, even if you have a permit.
So even if you're licensed?
It's all about keeping things safe during those elections, prevent violence.
Makes sense.
So even if Dela Cruz did have a license for those revolvers, just having them on him during an election, that's a no-no.
Gotcha. So no guns allowed during elections, period. Okay, so back to Dela Cruz. He's facing these charges. What happens next?
The trial court, they find him guilty of violating that election gun ban.
Okay.
But get this, they dismiss the illegal possession charge.
Wait, what? That doesn't seem right.
I know, right? But it all comes down to a specific quirk in Philippine law. It says that if someone's carrying an unlicensed firearm and they're also committing another crime at the same time, they can't be convicted separately for just the possession.
So he gets caught with these revolvers during an election gun ban, and because of this legal loophole, they can't pin him on the possession itself. That's wild. But I'm guessing Dela Cruz didn't just sit back and accept that verdict, did he?
You bet he didn't. He appeals, saying he had no clue about those firearms in his bag.
No idea.
His defense. He claims someone must have planted them.
Planted them? Come on.
He says that he left his bag with a porter while he was buying his ticket, and during that time, someone could have just slipped those guns in.
Okay, that sounds a little far-fetched.
Right. It's like something out of a movie.
But did he have any proof to back this up? Like maybe security camera footage of someone messing with his bag?
Nope, nothing. No witnesses, no description of the porter, no reason why anyone would target him.
So basically his whole defense was, hey, maybe this happened.
Pretty much. And the court, they weren't buying it. They needed more than just a maybe. They needed evidence. And you know what? This case, it didn't stop there. It went all the way to the top.
You're kidding. The Philippine Supreme Court.
Yep. The Supreme Court stepped in.
Wow. So what did they think? Did they believe Dela Cruz's story?
Well, they took their time, looked at everything really carefully, the evidence, the procedures, the whole shebang. And guess what?
They sided with Dela Cruz.
Nope. They upheld the guilty verdict.
No way. So even the Supreme Court didn't believe the whole planted gun theory. Why? What was their reasoning?
It was a multi-layered decision, but they really focused on a few key things. First, they emphasized that Dela Cruz, he voluntarily consented to the search.
Right. He gave them permission to look through his bag.
Exactly. That consent, that was a big deal for them, legally speaking.
Interesting. So even though he wasn't technically being arrested at that point, his willingness to let them search his bag, that really mattered to the Supreme Court. It wasn't like they forced him or anything.
Yeah. Right. It wasn't a forced search. He agreed to it. They also pointed out that while those port personnel, they might not be official police officers, their actions during those security checks, they fall under state authority, especially when it comes to making sure everyone's safe. They're basically acting on behalf of the government to keep things secure.
So it's not just about their job title. It's about their role in keeping everyone safe. But hold on, how can they even search someone's bag without a warrant? Isn't that, a violation of privacy?
That's where things get really interesting, and that's exactly what we'll unpack after the break.
So we're talking about privacy, security, the right to search, all those big questions.
Right. Where do we draw the line?
Exactly. And the Philippine Constitution, doesn't it guarantee protection against unreasonable searches and seizures?
It does. It does. But there are exceptions, and the Supreme Court, they had to figure out if this case, if it fit into one of those exceptions.
So it's like this legal tug of war.
Yeah, totally.
On one side, Dela Cruz, his right to privacy. On the other side, security, especially at a busy port like that.
It's all about finding that balance, that sweet spot.
All right, so how did the Supreme Court deal with this? Did they think the search was a violation of Dela Cruz's rights, or was it a legitimate security measure?
Well, they really took their time. They broke down the whole search process into 3 separate parts.
Okay, like what?
First, they looked at that initial X-ray scan of his bag. Then they looked at what the baggage inspector did after they saw the X-ray image, opening the bag.
Right.
And finally, they looked at what the police officer did, searching the bag and taking the firearms.
So they really wanted to understand every single step. Did they think the X-ray scan, was that even considered a search, legally speaking?
That's a good question, and it really gets into how technology and privacy mix. The Supreme Court, they said that those X-ray scans at ports, at airports, even though they are technically a kind of search, they're routine, part of security. They're justifiable, especially in places like ports and airports where, security is a big concern.
So it's like when you go to those places, you're kind of agreeing to a certain level of security.
Yeah, you're opting in. The court said that travelers, they have a lower expectation of privacy in those places. We walk through those metal detectors, we put our bags through the X-ray, sometimes even get patted down, all because we understand that security, well, it's important for everyone.
That makes sense. No one wants to be in danger, especially when traveling. Those security measures, even if they feel a little intrusive, they're there for a reason. But what about that next step? The baggage inspector opening Dela Cruz's bag. Wasn't that too much?
The Supreme Court, they said that the baggage inspector, what they did was a direct response to that X-ray. Remember, it clearly showed those firearms. So they had a good reason to think that something might be wrong, that a crime was happening.
So they weren't just randomly opening bags. The X-ray, it gave them a specific reason to check further. But hold on, those baggage inspectors, they're not police officers, right? So how can they open someone's bag like that?
That's a great point, and the Supreme Court actually talked about that specifically. They said that even though baggage inspectors aren't police, what they do during security checks, it's a state-related function, like they're acting on behalf of the government, to make sure everything's safe.
So it's not about their title, it's about what they're doing, their role in security. And Dela Cruz, he was cooperating the whole time, even agreed to let them search his bag. That had to be a big deal for the Supreme Court, right?
Definitely. The court emphasized that his consent, that it was voluntary, that was huge in determining if the search was legal. He wasn't forced. He said it was okay.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the last step? The police officer searching the bag after the inspector found something. Didn't they need a warrant for that?
That's where things get a bit tricky, and there's a legal term for this. In flagrante delicto.
In flagrante delicto. Sounds serious.
It is. It means caught in the act. The Supreme Court, they decided that when they found those firearms in Dela Cruz's bag, after she agreed to the search, it was like he was caught red-handed, possessing illegal firearms.
Oh, so the fact that they found the guns, and there was that election gun ban going on, and he consented to the search, all of that together meant he was caught in the act.
Exactly. And in the Philippines, if someone's caught in the act, the police can arrest them without a warrant. It's an exception to the rule. So that police officer, they could search the bag and take the firearms without needing a warrant.
Wow, so the timing of everything and Dela Cruz's consent, that really made a difference in whether the search was legal or not. It's amazing how all these legal ideas, they're all connected. But the Supreme Court, they didn't just focus on the little legal details, did they? They also thought about the bigger picture, what this case meant for society.
You're right. They saw that this case, Dela Cruz versus People, it wasn't just about one guy and a bag full of guns. It was about something much bigger, that struggle between individual rights and the need for security. And they said that security, while it's important, sometimes it can clash with individual rights.
So it's like, as a society, we have to decide how much privacy are we willing to give up to stay safe? And how do we make sure that those security measures, they don't go too far or target certain people unfairly?
Those are the million-dollar questions. And in this case, Dela Cruz versus People, it really shows us those dilemmas, playing out in real life. It reminds us that even simple things like checking a bag can turn into these huge legal battles.
And we didn't really get into Dela Cruz's whole argument. He didn't know about those guns. He said maybe someone put them there, right, while the bag was with the porter. Did the Supreme Court, did they think about that at all?
Oh, yeah, they did. They said, okay, sure, it's possible someone could plant evidence, but they didn't buy it in this case.
Right.
Not Dela Cruz. He didn't have any proof. No one saw anything suspicious. He couldn't even describe the porter. No reason why someone would target him. His defense, it just wasn't strong enough.
So the court, they needed more than just a what if. They needed some real evidence, something solid.
Exactly. And they also mentioned that Dela Cruz, he was a frequent traveler. He knew how things worked at the port. They thought he should have been more careful, especially with security being so tight.
So they're saying even if someone did plant those guns, you got to be responsible for your stuff, especially in a place like that.
Right. You have to take care of your things. The court, I think they were saying that while privacy is important, everyone also has a duty to be responsible, to protect themselves and their belongings.
It's a good point. Makes you think. Be aware of your surroundings. Don't leave your bags alone, especially when you're traveling. Know the rules. Know what to expect.
Absolutely. And, this case also shows how different laws, they can all get mixed up. Dela Cruz was charged with two things, right? Illegal possession and violating that election gun ban. But in the end, the trial court only found him guilty of the gun ban.
Yeah. Why was that? I was wondering about that.
It comes down to a specific part of the law in the Philippines, Republic Act No. 8294. That's the one about illegal possession of firearms. It says that if someone's caught with an unlicensed gun and they didn't do anything else wrong, then they can be charged with illegal possession. But because Dela Cruz was also breaking the election gun ban, the court couldn't convict him for both.
Wow. That's complicated.
It is. The legal system, it can be really complex. All these laws, all these rules, sometimes they overlap, sometimes they contradict each other. That's why we need people who really understand the law, to make sure it's applied fairly.
So to wrap things up, what are the big takeaways from Dela Cruz versus People? What should our listeners be thinking about after this deep dive?
I think there are a few big things to consider. One, that balance between our rights as individuals and the need for security, that's a tough one.
Yeah, finding that middle ground.
Two, consent matters. Dela Cruz agreed to let them search his bag, and that was huge in the court's decision. Three, we all got to be smart, be aware of what's going on, especially when security is a concern. And finally, the law. It's not always simple. Cases like this, they can get really tricky.
It's been a wild ride through the Philippine legal system with this one. It shows us that even in ordinary places, legal battles can happen, and they make us think about privacy, security, all those important things.
And it makes us ask, in a world that's so focused on security, where do we draw the line? How do we protect our freedom and stay safe at the same time?
Big questions, for sure. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time. Keep those legal minds thinking, and remember, even everyday actions can have some pretty big consequences.